My name is Ryan Schmierer. I'm the VP of Operations at Sparx Services North America, and I'm joined today by Chris Armstrong, who's the President and Chief Architect at Sparx Services North America. And today we're going to be talking about integrated data and the role that it plays in architecture analysis. So we're going to be going through a lot of stuff and looking at this from a lot of different perspectives. So I encourage you to enter any questions you have into the webinar platform, and we'll go ahead and we'll address those at the end. So to provide you some context, for those of you who joined the last session, we talked a little bit about the state of the architecture of enterprise architecture survey that was conducted earlier this year. And one of the key findings from that survey is that companies are focusing on architecture analysis instead of just doing architecture design, particularly as we look at the role of how they're using modeling tools. And they're seeking to use Sparx as the tool to bring data together from different systems of record so that they can map together the connective tissue of the organization and perform the sort of analysis that generates the architecture insights that their organizations are looking for. In this section, we're going to be talking about that trend and the trend related to architecture analysis in general and what problems people are trying to answer as they're looking at their architecture models and their architecture data in more detail. We'll also talk to Chris about the different ways you can integrate external systems with Sparx and the pros and cons of some of those different options. Then we'll provide some forward-looking perspective on where the technology and business trends are going over the next few years. All in all, this should take about 35 minutes, which will leave us plenty of time for questions. So as we're going through, please go ahead and get those in the platform so we can answer those. If we can't get to everything in the session today, we will be engaging on the Teams channel, or if you'd like to reach out to either Chris or I after the call, we'd be happy to engage with you to talk about these in more detail. And engage with us in the Teams channel for Sparx Services North America. So, Chris, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Fantastic. The State of Enterprise Architecture Survey highlighted some key trends around leveraging external data for EA use cases, things like portfolio management, requirements traceability, and APM. Is this only an enterprise architecture trend, or are you seeing this with other architecture domains too?
Well, it's certainly something that we, very regularly encounter in enterprise architecture engagements because of their scope and strategic nature. But we've also seen it predominantly in the systems engineering domain, where there's actually quite a long tradition of creating a systems engineering tool chain where a bunch of apps are all integrated to, support the enterprise and fit for purpose applications for requirements management, simulation, things like that. But we also see it in some larger scale business process modeling and business analysis engagements. So not just enterprise architecture, but very common. But as you might not be surprised, a lot of the concepts and approaches and business problems they're trying to solve are very similar.
Gotcha. So as you and I have talked about a bit in the past, architecture analysis is really all about helping organizations solve problems and answer different questions. What are some of the problems or questions that people are trying to answer when they're bringing data together?
Well, fundamentally, it's based on a premise of wanting to be able to provide architecture guidance and support using actual, factual-based data. So we can move away from, speculation and, interpolation and derivation. And, the idea that a lot of enterprises have a lot of information, scattered throughout their enterprise, and they're really not taking full advantage of it. So there's a real opportunity to, exploit this. And of course, in the architecture profession, we call this reuse, right? Why create something new, create a one-off spreadsheet or, a database or whatever, when there's already a team whose whole mission is to keep that kind of content up to date and being relevant. And so, in many cases, particularly as it relates to, enterprise architecture, we're often looking at using EA techniques and models for helping executive stakeholders, particularly, have a lens of looking at the business, application, data, and technology landscapes in a way that minimizes or doesn't get the executives distracted from the complexity. So a big part of this is there's a lot of complexity in a lot of large scale organizations, and it's a reality of their business model and the way they do business. But often in enterprise architecture, we're looking for ways to become masters of that complexity instead of becoming victims of the complexity. And certainly, a use case is around, how can we make things less complicated in our enterprise that are there because of historical, choices and decisions, but aren't necessarily making, giving a lot of competitive benefit. So we often are looking at, mapping enterprise architecture content to other, base repositories, such as other systems of record, like, list of applications from an APM tool, or a list of, deployed services in a CMDB. But it's often difficult to assess the quality and completeness of that data when you're looking at it just straight in the face. And so when we start using this data in different ways, we start to really understand if this is the data we need, if it's good data, and if it's quality data, and if it's complete data. So there's a real great opportunity when we ingest this kind of content or figure out how to interact with it, that we can improve the quality of some of those original data sources, and then have that add to the executive perspectives that we're hoping people to base decisions on.
Gotcha. So in there, you mentioned a little bit, the notion of different systems of record and companies storing data in a lot of different places. Over the last few years, I think we've seen the trend sort of shift away from trying to have everything mastered in the same place towards having different pieces of information, whether it's org hierarchies or product lists or IT systems, in the tools that the teams that work with them most often live day to day. So
Yep.
So we see sort of, instead of trying to bring everything together and have everyone consume everything out of your architectural platform, we're seeing the data move outward towards the people who are interacting with it most often. Can you drill down a little bit more on the types of systems that people are trying to integrate with, and the types of data that's in it that's architecturally significant? Because clearly, not everything in every operational system has architectural significance. But
Yep.
what are the key things that people are trying to bring together, and where's it coming from?
Yep, and there's two dimensions of that. So I like to think of there being architecturally significant data, and then architecturally relevant data. So it's things like, well, that's really not architecture, but we care about it because when we look at it through the lens of the enterprise architecture, it helps us understand the nature of impact, for example. So so either whether it's architecturally significant or architecturally relevant. A good example might be, like you were saying, if there's a system of record of the organization structure, which might be an HR system, why would we worry about trying to recreate that from scratch? Architects have a lot more important things to do than being data entry people, replicating that. And then of course now you get into an issue with the concurrency and quality of the data. So why not rely on the system of record where that organization structure is? Maybe facilities management. And of course, this is going to be very dependent on the use case, right? What data do we need in order to do this, support the kind of analysis that our decision makers are that need to make better decisions. One that often is pretty compelling, as a lot of people wouldn't be surprised, would be ERP systems and financial systems, because once you start putting dollars next to things that are related to architecture stuff, like how much aggregate money are we spending every year to implement a particular business capability or to support a certain value stream, that's when executives suddenly get really interested in architectural content, because it can provide some pretty novel perspectives, and again, bring visibility into transparency to things that may not have been as evident without some of the architecture perspectives. Another real common one that we're seeing is relating to IT service management platforms, and of course the the 800-pound gorilla, is ServiceNow in many organizations that does, as you know, and others, more than just IT service management, but the CMDB, application portfolio management, project portfolio management, GRC, business continuity, and then of course there's solutions out there that are used specifically for requirements management, like you said, maybe product management systems, CRM solutions. So we ask people to think pretty broadly about, again, what data do you have in your enterprise that's managed by another piece of software and another team that would be useful, to support some of the analysis scenarios and try to take full advantage of it.
Gotcha. So it's about understanding what problems you're trying to solve and bringing in the data wherever it's available, and then using your architecture tools to map it together and fill in the gaps.
Exactly.
Something like that. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. Away from sort of the business use case and kind of drill down a little bit. The Sparx architecture platform, whether you're talking about EA, whether you're talking about Pro Cloud Server, Collaborate, there's a lot of different integration options and capabilities in there. Can you give us a quick rundown of what are some of these different capabilities that are available and what some of them do?
Yeah, and the one of the things you want to think about is also the nature of the consumption of the data. So are we really doing kind of a one-off, one-time analysis? Or are we doing a migration? Like there's a bunch of, project data or financial data that's in a spreadsheet, which is really not a great place to do it. Put up on a SharePoint site, and we're just trying to pull it into Enterprise Architect. So now that we can manage it there as a system of record. But both of those scenarios share a common approach, which is you really are focusing on trying to get that content into the EA repository a single time. You're going to do it once, or you're going to do it relatively infrequently and maybe not worry so much about keeping the data synchronized. So more episodic snapshots. So in that case, there are some ETL tools that we can bring to bear to help with that. There's the MDG Office add-in, which includes the ability to import content that might be in Word tables and Word documents or Excel spreadsheets. And then many EA users might be familiar with the kind of the long-term CSV importing capabilities with plain CSV files. So as some may know, those different options offer different levels of fidelity on what you can import and how you can represent it in Enterprise Architect. But it's important to make sure you don't do something that's overkill, which of course many of us in the architect profession have a proclivity towards. Like, hey, let's solve this problem in a really interesting time. Do a CSV import. So that's kind of the simple side, but then there's the actual real time, daily, weekly, depending on the synchronization necessary. We're going to have actual integrations between different IT systems. And so for that, Enterprise Architect and Collaborate and Pro Cloud Server offer a lot of options. Some that are out of the box, and some of that are more tools to allow end users to create their own custom solutions. So one of them, that's been around for a long, long time is the COM API that's provided by the Enterprise Architect client. Pretty mature, has been around for a couple of decades, pretty well documented, and pretty capable. But that does suffer from a side effect of, in the modern world, a lot of integrations are really being done at the server level, not at the client desktop level. But there are some use cases, again, depending on the tools that you're connecting with and the kind of functionality that you're going to provide, that might be, okay. Then, as many people know, there is a relational database behind the scenes in Enterprise Architect. And so at least for extracting information from Enterprise Architect, issuing, select statements against the database directly can be a very effective way to get data out of it. We do tend to recommend that you exercise extreme caution the other way around. Namely, of course, you can choose to update your database, your EA repository with inserts and updates and deletes. But as Tech support and other wise people will say do that at your own peril. There's, of course, a number of out-of-the-box MDG integrations and links for different, IDEs and target platforms. But people tend to be seem to be more interested in migrating into a more server approach, which, of course, is what the Pro Cloud Server has to offer. So as many may know, there's a integration layer called SBPI, server-based plugins. And out of the box, I think, Ryan, you might know better than I, but I think there's about 15 plus, integrations with commercial applications. So things like Jira, Confluence, Azure DevOps, Polarian, new one just came out for JAMA. So those last two products tend to be used a lot in the systems engineering space for requirements. And then, the SBPI platform does have support for creating custom integrations. So if one of them isn't on the list of the out of the box, you could, fire up a development environment and, create a new integration, that aligns with those APIs. But that, again, you would use that if you're interested in, the functionality that the platform provides, namely within Enterprise Architect. You can open up an integration window and see data that's in an external system, see properties about those things, maybe participate in some discussions and some collaboration, and then pull proxy elements, and maybe not all of them, just the ones that you care about, into the EA repository so you can use them for establishing traceability. But then the Pro Cloud Server also offers a REST API that's conformant to the Open Services Lifecycle standard, which is now an OASIS standard. And basically, OSLC is a set of industry standard APIs for how engineering tools work together. So there's a specification for requirements management tools. There's a specification for configuration management tools, test tools, and the one that the Pro Cloud Server supports is called Architecture Management 2.0. So that's a way that, using, get, put, post, delete, the standard HTTP REST APIs, that you can do quite a bit of anything you might possibly like, but using more of, again, a modern REST API platform. Then there are also integrations that Collaborate has, specifically with tools like Jira and Azure DevOps. And then, again, we're seeing more organizations working on, true server-to-server integrations where we're basically, creating some middleware that's talking between, the REST APIs of a server, of a provider application, and then the REST APIs provided by a Pro Cloud Server.
Gotcha. Sounds like there's a lot of options there.
Options.
Yeah, and I see Sparx is offering a growing list of the SBPI integrations, but if you've got a system where there is no commercial integration available, what are the options? What do you do then?
Yep. Well, as you probably guess, looking at the approach, whether it's one-time, analysis and snapshots versus continual integration, particularly for the continual integration, there's some non-trivial complexity. And of course, a lot of the people we work with, particularly in the enterprise architecture space, a lot of the projects that they're trying to support are changing their software applications through, application integration, through, APIs and security protocols. And so, it's as many people know, it's a non-trivial activity. But one of the challenges is, wanting to really make sure that, particularly the architects and the systems engineers, which tend to be some of the most, highly paid, highly compensated resources in the organization, really shouldn't be, spending time, working on this. They really, should be looking at partnering with an organization that's gonna, that brings some of this stuff to bear, because there's a lot of moving parts in making this work in an operational environment.
Gotcha. We've talked about sort of integrations, and whether you talk about low-level integrations with COM API or some of the higher-level stuff with server-based plugins. We're talking about moving a lot of data around. But is this just about aggregating data and getting it all in one place, or is there more to the picture? If I bring my data in one place, is it going to give me what I need?
Right.
Am I going to be able to answer my questions?
Yep.
Or is there more to it?
And this is where we want to, try to, put our enterprise architect hats on and examine our own profession and our own, systems of tools that we use to support it, because these are all part of an enterprise ecosystem. So, usually the first thing you want to start with is, a set of requirements. What problem are you, and based on a scenario, and what, kind of goals are you trying to help achieve? But that way you can make sure you understand who the stakeholders are and what the data is that's required to render a particular architecture viewpoint, as it's called. And then, the next step is often looking at, having an agreement about, what is the data that we're interested in. And so, enterprise architecture best practices suggest that we should build what's called a meta model. And for those of you that might not be familiar with it, a meta model is really a logical or conceptual data model that represents the types of information that we want to keep track of in our enterprise. And a subset of those are going to be owned by enterprise architecture, but another set is going to be owned by, the project management community, business analysts, IT service management, so on and so forth. But we want to have an enterprise model that identifies all those things. And fundamentally, what the meta model does is provides a common language for the enterprise, even for just the way the humans talk about this stuff, because we get in a lot of trouble in projects, generally speaking, when we use the same words that mean different things to different people, or we use different words to mean the same thing. And a lot of times this language is really arbitrary, but one of the things enterprise architecture can help with is to build consensus, across these disparate teams to say, hey, we need to have an integrated way of looking at this metadata about the enterprise. And so we build this meta model, which, we of course would build in Enterprise Architect. And then, that helps us understand what properties we need, how these things are going to be related to one another. And then we can make informed decisions about systems of record and systems of reference, and systems of, engagement, systems of insight. So that we can make it really clear when it comes to a data governance perspective. If we find a problem with data in one place, we should be fixing it, over in this place. And then, as many may know, there is a particular feature of Enterprise Architect and Collaborate that allows us to implement a meta model, and that's called creating an MDG technology, which is a collection of UML profiles that describe the new stereotypes and tagged values that people are going to use in their modeling, so that when you load that data into the EA repository, it's distinctive from other types of content. So for example, we don't want everything to look like a UML class. I mean, it could, but we want, projects to be different from applications, to be different from, products. And so, implementing that custom enterprise meta model with a custom MDG technology is also one of our best practices.
Gotcha. So, it sounds, if I read between the lines here, integrating Sparx with external data sources, is something that's very much achievable, but it isn't necessarily simple or turnkey. It really takes some thoughtful preparation and, and some technical configuration. Realistically, Chris, is this something most architects can do themselves, or do they need to get some help?
Well, I mean, that's the problem with architects, right? And then I'll put myself in that box, which is, of course, we can do it. We're architects. We're really smart, capable people. We used to be developers back in the day. I know SQL, and I know what, I'm specifying REST APIs all day long. So, the real issue is not can architects do it, is should architects do it? And like I was saying earlier, architects often are, a pretty expensive resource. And while it's a lot of fun, I'll admit, something I like to do, the architects at our, client organizations, they really need to be focusing on what only they can do, which is, apply enterprise architecture or systems engineering or process modeling to solve their company's business problems. They know the people, they know the organization, they have all these relationships. We can't, and no one else can really do that for them. So it really makes a lot of sense, just like you would in any other systems integration. If you're going to do Oracle or Salesforce or ServiceNow, Could you figure out how to do all those integrations yourself? Sure, but why would you? Because there's a specialized, community of people that focus on, hey, we've done, 100, ServiceNow integrations. We've encountered a lot of these systems and a lot of these business problems before. So why don't you partner with us, because we can bring a lot of best practice, set a good foundation for a starting point and really, accelerate the implementation. So the same thing would apply to here is, partnering yourself with an organization that's done this stuff before, so that you can glean the same kind of benefits.
Gotcha. Okay, so kind of changing gears again, from, okay, here's what you can do today. Where's all this going? And how is this changing?
Well, one of the things that we've been trying to be mindful about is, as enterprise architects in particular, is, the way that a lot of these integrations are being created are really kind of certainly a tried and true traditional approach, which is point-to-point application integration. But as a lot of, enterprise architects out there know, that's actually led to a lot of complexity issues. We've done a lot of work at a lot of organizations. We're trying to figure out what application talks to what application, and then what's the consequence of making changes and how those propagate to upstream and downstream systems is really complicated by having, basically peer-to-peer connections amongst every app that needs data from every other app. So, part of it is looking at more modern, data management, the streaming solutions, PubSub, Kafka. There's a lot of emerging, choices out there. So it's kind of one of those situations where you look at what you're doing as an enterprise architect, trying to help people do enterprise architecture with a tool like Enterprise Architect, and you go, gee, why are we worried about how EA is going to be connected to all these different systems when, we could just come up with a standard canonical data model, a set of JSON schemas, based on that meta model, and we could create a data stream that anybody could subscribe to, and we just write out data to the, the data stream, and whoever wants it picks it up. Why do we care? We do, but we don't want to care, have to care about the what all the consumers are and the brittleness that gets introduced with point-to-point integration. So that's one thing. Let's try to inject into our architecture tool chain the same kind of data application and integration best practices that we see across the rest of the enterprise. Another thing is, again, thinking about how can, one of our missions is to try to help, at least with the architect community and the engineer community, is, how can we exploit technology to really free up the architects and the engineers to do what, again, only they can do. And a lot of times people get sucked into doing a lot of manual mapping activities, for example, whether that's in a diagram or even in an Excel spreadsheet or, however you do it. I'm sure a lot of people have thought, particularly with some of the recent advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning, do I really, as an architect, have to spend 20 hours, a quarter doing this kind of mapping thing? Couldn't I train, an AI ML model about this and then have it, figure out what the mappings are? And that, that really gets us, I think, to a really big new opportunity where, a lot of the integrations that are created point to point are based on trying to map one type of thing to another type of thing. But if we could, kind of flatten that out and make the inference of relationships between things be driven more dynamically through machine learning, I think there's a great opportunity there. And while we all want everybody in the world to use Sparx Enterprise Architect, not everybody does, even though it is the world's most popular modeling tool. There are people that create diagrams in Visio, competitive tools, so on and so forth. And so, couldn't we use AI ML to do, actual graphical visual processing of diagrams? So if we're trying to pull in content from someplace else, do we really need to worry about what tool it's created in, and whether it's supports Archimate XML or UML XMI and blah blah blah? Could we use machine learning to reverse engineer pictures of diagrams? Now, of course, you may not get all the same metadata and all that sort of stuff, but like I said, there's I think sometimes we get a little too pulled into traditional ways of looking at this because they're comfortable for us, and really haven't seen what some of the opportunities are for really taking it to the next level.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's some really interesting research and projects going on in that AI ML space right now. I had a chance over the last year to work with a couple of teams on these, and one of them was asking the question and said, if I can point my phone at a street sign in some language I've never seen before, and it'll translate it into English or whatever my language is, and recognize it from just looking at a picture of something in the environment, why can't I do something similar with reading BPMN or UML? I mean, it's a language, and so when I see that rectangle, and I see based upon the structure, it's a BPMN diagram, I know that it's an activity, and I know an activity has certain metadata that goes along with it. Some of it can be inferred from the diagram, but also if I know I have an activity that's named this thing, maybe I have a system someplace, a database that mentions a list of activities that it can connect the metadata from the database to the diagram what it sees, to recreate and draw those connections together. So a lot of very promising stuff on the horizon there. Another area we're seeing some innovation right now is about recreating architecture content from the data. When you look at if you have a meta model and you've got processes over here and capabilities over here, or the example that we're working with right now is you've got applications and you've got requirements. So maybe you got applications in ServiceNow and you've got requirements in Jira. Can't we use keyword matching? Because I'd be willing to bet you that requirement mentions the name of the application someplace, to be able to bring these things in and discover the relationships, and then using automated diagram generation to actually redraw the pictures, to draw context diagrams for these applications, so you can see, here's the application, and here's all the requirements related to it, here's the processes that it enables. A lot of this information can be inferred from the data itself. So,
and particularly with automated diagram generation, that's just another place where, again, I'm sure people on this call have used tools like EA or Visio to create these huge, big, complicated diagrams that show how things are related to everything. And while there might be issues with creating diagrams with that density of content, if the tool already knows how everything's related to everything, why should a human have to spend all this time to create the visualization and make it look useful and interpretable by other people? It's just not a good use of that architect's time.
Absolutely. So, Chris, aren't we also seeing a shift away from batch processing to more trigger-based integrations?
Yeah, and that's kind of related to what I was talking before about, for whatever reason, tradition, comfort, not thinking outside of the box as we try to think about, we need to do this, pull in all this stuff from this other system, and then one of the challenges, intricacies that comes up is how do we synchronize, namely what happens when stuff's been deleted and how do we reconcile that, but in today's world, a lot of I was just having a meeting with chief architect of a large telco company and trying to describe some of these types of things, and I was kind of approaching it the traditional approach, and he actually came back and challenged me and he said, Chris, come on now, it's 2022. The scenario was they're using ServiceNow to manage their project portfolio, and one of the things that's expected is that that the project is going to have a package, a folder in Enterprise Architect to do their work. And I'm like, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We'll pull that data in from, ServiceNow every night, and we'll check to see what the new stuff is. And then we'll automatically create a structure in the repository for that project. And we'll assign the architects to it, set their permissions, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no. Why can't we make it work where as soon as the project is created in ServiceNow, a message is set in real time to Enterprise Architect, and then it instantly creates the project structure, does the provisioning of other stuff, and then sends an email to the team saying their workspace is ready with a link to get into the repository. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds even better. Again, just an interesting circumstance very recently where, I fell for some of this stuff as well. And it certainly was novel to have a customer say, hey, no, I think we can do better. So again, really just getting back to, we've been able to do some pretty darn sophisticated things to support the business, like you were saying, with visual recognition of stop signs and real time interpretation of language that we use on our phones every day. Why can't some of these things are becoming very ubiquitous, and so we really should be thinking about, well, how can we really exploit those types of capabilities to support the architect and engineer practice.
Agreed. So, I guess kind of wrapping up, as you can see, there's a lot of value to be gained from integrating your external data today to support your architecture analysis activities. There's also a lot of opportunities in the future. Things are changing. This is a highly dynamic environment, and the capabilities are evolving quite quickly here. But integrating Sparx with external systems isn't necessarily turnkey or easy. It does take some thoughtfulness if you want to maximize the value that you get from these activities. What you don't want to do is just jump into pulling data together and suddenly you have this big mess.
Right, and we don't want to fall for the false promise that we've often been pretty critical of, which is, solving a business problem with a piece of software where you don't really understand the business problem is not a good solution. So again, making two pieces of software talk to one another and exchange data, that's the easy part. Not to say that there aren't complexities with the actual implementation, but the bigger picture of why are we doing this? What are the requirements? Who cares? Those are the important things we want to bring to bear as well.
Yep. And Chris, like you mentioned a couple of times in there, architects and engineers may be capable of doing the integration and integrating a couple of systems together. However, we really need to be looking at who are those unique resources that can only do a few things, those special resources, and architects often fall into that category, those specialized resources, and making sure that they're focused on their high value activities and not doing activities that somebody else can do for them. This I think is a great example.
And I think that offers a lot of promise to the architect profession, which has been, subjected to not unwarranted criticism in the past, where they've spent lots of time, creating repositories, populating it, doing mapping for all the right reasons. But if you looked at the timesheets, you might find they're spending, again, 25% of their time just doing data maintenance, which really compromises their ability to do, again, stuff that is more value added. So closing that gap, there's a real opportunity to really elevate the architecture profession, because if we can spend only 5% of our time worrying about all this data and all that stuff, and 95% of our time interacting with stakeholders, providing good analysis, it can be a real game changer, I think, for the enterprise architecture profession.
Absolutely. And for those of you who sat in on the previous session about the state of the architecture industry survey results, you'll recall one of the key findings was we're facing a shortage of qualified architects. And so you have a scarce resource here that's becoming even scarcer. And so, if you want to integrate your Sparx platform, there's a lot of value. This is one of the things that you can do to really get more bang from your buck from your architect staffing investments. But when you think about how you implement this thing, it's often best to seek the aid of a Sparx integration consultancy, some sort of an organization that specializes in doing these kinds of integrations. Because while your architects can do them, simply they got better things and more important things that they need to be doing. So there are a lot of factors to think about here, technical factors, business factors, some architectural factors. And it's definitely something that is going to be unique to each organization, but I encourage you all to think about, what are the problems you're trying to solve and what's the most effective and efficient way of doing that. So let's kind of pause here and open it up for some questions.
Yeah, yeah, Ryan. I have a couple of questions. The first question is there a difference between MDG technology in Sparx EA and MDG technology in Collaborate?
The answer is no. They are the same thing, and typically, as some may know, there's a SDK built into Enterprise Architect to create an MDG technology, which is built through a series of models that actually delivers an XML file that contains the configuration. And then, that gets loaded into the EA repository. So the EA tool can take advantage of some of the, features about notation and special properties and things like that. But you also need to load the same MDG technology into Collaborate for same reasons. Namely, once you've loaded the custom MDG into Collaborate, you have finer grained control over what's displayed and how it's displayed to different people. If you don't do this MDG technology thing, you still might have the data in your repository, but it's not going to be as easy to manage given the features of both Enterprise Architect and Collaborate.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. With Collaborate 4, there was a lot more support added for custom MDGs, and so if you think about it, your custom MDG technology defines your company's language, and you use that language in Enterprise Architect to create and manage data. You use it in Collaborate to help render data and make it more consumable for your stakeholders. So Collaborate 4 brought a lot more alignment there to be able to leverage what you were doing in EA already and extend that to the collaboration layers.
Yeah, thanks, both. The next question from Johan asking, thanks for your discussion. Do you have some recommendations of where to get relevant knowledge like books, courses, conferences, etc.?
Well, this conference, although, I'm not sure that you're going to learn a lot of the dirty secrets on how to make this, how to make some of the stuff work. There's a lot of good, online documentation included with the product. So that's where I, represent, probably have most people start. There are a couple of books out there written by some third parties that are worth taking a look at. And then there's the forums, so whether it's the user forum on the Sparx website, there's a Stack Exchange group, Stack Overflow. So there are a number of online resources that you could use to, get started.
Yeah, and I'd actually add to that, when we talk about data integration here, we're talking about the intersection here between sort of architecture and data management and data science as well. So there are a number of industry organizations, the Data Management Association and others, that are having conferences talking about the latest trends in terms of data science and data management, where you can learn a lot about some of the new capabilities with AI/ML, data warehousing, and business intelligence and analytics. And often those have local chapters where you can also network with other folks who are trying to bring data together. They may not necessarily be using Sparx or an architecture tool to do it, but fundamentally the problem's similar. I mean, they're trying to bring data together from different parts of the organization, analyze it, figure out what it means. And so I would look at perhaps the data management domain to help provide some adjacent opportunities.
Oh, okay. So the other question is, what are your thoughts about graph databases versus relational databases?
Well, I'll admit, because of just where I've been working lately, I've been in the relational world quite a bit. So I have a lot of comfort and expertise in that, as I'm sure many do over the past, couple decades. But certainly, aware of and familiar. And so, part of it might be what's the nature of the question. So, I'm guessing it's probably related to where do graph databases fit into this whole data management, data integration thing? And, there are some that might make a claim. Well, again, graph databases have advantages. They also have, some disadvantages. That the semantical data, because of its how the multi-dimensional mappings are done between things, could be better handled in a graph database as opposed to a relational database. But as many may know, the Enterprise Architect database schema is pretty highly normalized in the sense that it's based on three fundamental concepts. Elements have features and properties, and they're related to one another. So it's in some ways a kind of a triple store in some ways, even though it's in a relational database. But there could be use cases where to get the kind of analytics and perspective you want out of things, that taking some of your enterprise architecture data and some of your other enterprise data and mashing it together in a graph database, or a data lake, might be an approach towards solving some problems as well. Ryan, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so my thought on this really comes down to practicality. At the end of the day, whether you're talking about different data management technologies, it comes down to what are the problems you're trying to solve and how easily can you solve them. And you need to factor in the skill set factor as well. Most architects are most familiar with relational databases. It's technology that they know, it's something that they can easily understand, easily explain, and easily work with. And so most architecture tools, including Sparx, are, they're optimized and they're designed to work with relational data structures. I mean, you look at a meta model, it's a relational map is what it is. Graph databases may provide more efficiency and traceability and doing some of the analysis. However, the question is, do you and your team have the skills and understanding to be able to use it? Because you can have the best tool in the world, and I use this example, you can have the fastest sports car in the world, but if you don't know how to drive, it's not going to help you. And so I would really focus in on what are the tools that you have available to you and the skills you have to use those tools. How can you apply those to solve the specific problems you're trying to solve? And so don't get caught up in sort of the underpinning, hey, this is a cool thing, I got to try using this. Really look at it and say, okay, I need to solve this problem. How can I get to an answer quickest so my organization can use that answer to drive value?
Yeah, thank you. So these are the questions as of now. I have pasted the similar questions in the same questions to the Microsoft Teams too for you to answer, for the other participants to see and check the answers. And yeah, you please carry on. Questions as of now, these are the questions I have for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julie. So, I guess, kind of summarizing it, let me start with thanking you, Chris, for taking some time to meet with us today and go through all this stuff. Appreciate your...
My pleasure, thank you.
Great. And then for those people who are watching this on the YouTube videos after the event and don't have access to the event platform, please go ahead and enter comments in the YouTube section, or feel free to contact us go to the Sparx Systems site US website. You can reach out, and Chris and I would be happy to engage in the conversation afterwards and sort of fill you in on the discussion. As I mentioned in my previous session, this is the start of the process. The purpose of this summit is really to share ideas and start a conversation. It's where we take it from here that's going to make the impact for all of us. So I encourage everyone to engage in the Teams discussion over the next few days. Reach out to us afterwards if you'd like to talk about this a little bit more. And on the topic of integration here, if you're looking at it and saying, yes, this is something that I want to do, I don't really know how to do it. I mentioned, that, this is a place where a lot of organizations are best to engage in consultancy. Sparx Services North America is one of those. And so if you'd like us to help you, we're happy to do that. If you're in another region, there are a number of other Sparx partners. Go to the Sparx Systems website and look at the regional partners. But I encourage you to talk to the Sparx partner in your geography. Find somebody you can work with to help go through this process with you. It's going to help you achieve value faster and lower your overall cost of getting there. And that's really what it's all about. Help your organization deliver more value faster. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to meet with us today and sitting on this session.